Welcome to Virtualize Everything, where we strive to educate and inform about virtualization. So I was editing another video on Godify, and this idea popped into my head for a quick, simple, easy video that people might like to know. I installed Proxmox on a brand new system in a brand new house last night, and this is the culmination of the first 2 hours of life of my Proxmox server and the configurations I did. The first thing I did once accessing the web interface was to go here to Updates and Repository, disable the paid repositories right here for PVE Enterprise and Ceph Enterprise, and add the no subscription repository here to our Proxmox server by clicking add. Then I reloaded everything, refreshed the list, and I was able to upgrade everything. So I'm now here at the newest version of Proxmox. The next thing I did here at my Proxmox server was to configure network settings. And I started out as I'm using a fairly decent setup of a TP-Link Omida ER605 version 2 router to control my network. So I started by configuring my VLAN. Now, I do have to mention that although I run the Omida SDN here on Proxmox, I started out by configuring the Omida router using the Omida SDN software on my Windows system before moving the configuration file over to the hosted SDN controller here on Proxmox, where it will live for the rest of the life of this setup. But back to my Proxmox server, I set up my VLAN and then I set up my bridge. I also took care to configure IP addresses where needed for accessing other systems inside of the network. Once I had my VLANs configured and my bridges configured, I went to installing the software. And as you can see from the container numbering, my first one I did was the SDN controller. Now, this SDN controller allows me to configure the rest of the equipment on my network. I stick heavily to the TP-Link Omida ecosystem, and I use their wireless access point as well as their managed switches and their routers for controlling my houses. It keeps everything simple and easy to set up and configure, as well as allowing me one web interface for communicating with all of them. Then I set up 3 separate Pi-hole instances. Each one of these instances corresponds to a VLAN on my network, and it allows me to monitor and control how DNS works on each particular LAN. Once I had all 3 of these set up and I had some control over it, I went on to setting up my SMTP forwarding server. As many of you know from my video, Postfix, I use Postfix for setting this up, and this allows me to use Gmail to get notifications from my SDN controller and my Proxmox system. So once this is set up, I'm able to go to Data Center and then Notifications and configure my Proxmox server to use my Gmail. To do so, I can click Add and I can click on SMTP, and then I fill out my setting. I have a further video on configuring Postfix for Proxmox using the web interface if you'd like to know more about how to do this setup. So at that point, this is where I am on my Proxmox server. I shouldn't mention that maybe I should have possibly set up firewalls before now, but my next step will be to set up firewalls, and then I'm going to add some form of software that's going to allow me to monitor the state of all of my systems updated, as well as some software that will allow me to monitor the health condition of my Proxmox server, my SDN controller, and my Pi-hole container. And then from there, I plan to add Home Assistant to begin integrating with my new home's smart features. I bought a spec home from one of the nation's large developers, and it comes with some smart home features, and I would like to control them myself from my own server instead of using the developer's software. With this, I'm going to conclude this video. I hope you enjoyed the first things I did here on my Proxmox server, and I hope it gave you some ideas of what you should or shouldn't do when deploying your first Proxmox server, if you're at that point. As always, have a good night and consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to get more content on Proxmox and other virtualization topics.